challenge. So you're expected to be able to address the challenge in the examination in the same way as you would in the real world, right? So how do you, if you're at work and you have a business problem, I don't know, you've heard about a new competitor entering the marketplace. Let's keep it simple, right? So what happens? Let me just let Megan in. So what happens when you hear about this new competitor? What do? Well, typically you'll find out who the competitor is, what their products and services are like, who their customers are, what they charge, as much as you possibly can. And then what you do is you try and identify how much of a threat they are and what you can do to protect yourself against them, okay? And whether or not they are going to influence or undermine your strategy. Okay, that's how you do it in the real world. Okay, if you're on the board of directors, that's what you'd be concerned with. It's exactly the same with SBL. So let's suppose a candidate goes into the exam, sees the word competitor, thinks, hello, I know a model which analyzes competition called Porter's 5 forces model. Right, so I'm just going to start talking about Porter's 5 forces because that's what the question must be about. And then the candidate goes through all the Porter's 5 forces and explains what they are and says, "Great, I've answered the question." Absolutely not. You are expected to take a real-world approach to answering SBL questions. In fact, that's related to another misconception that many students have, which is that frameworks and theories are the key to passing SBL. Again, not true. I had a student, he earned 89% in SBL, a very impressive mark, 84, 89, I'm confused which one it was. I think it was 84, I beg your pardon. And he didn't use a single model in his exam, not a single one, right? So you've got to know how to deal with models. You've got to understand that this is not an academic examination and approach it in a practical way. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means lots and lots of things. But one of the things it means is that if there are 5 people facing a real world challenge, right? Each of them will come up with a different way of approaching that challenge, right? How do we deal with it? And each of them may well be good answers, good solutions, robust solutions that have a good chance of working, but they may be very different to one another. It's exactly the same with SBL. There is no single correct or incorrect answer. And so when I hear a student say, well, I wrote something down, but I'm not sure if it was right or not, I say, well, it might well be right. There is no such thing as a completely right answer. Even the suggested solution is only that. It's a suggested solution. It's not the only solution, right? There are lots and lots of misconceptions that candidates have about SBL. And when I work with students, that's really what I focus on. Let me share some slides with you. I mean, this wouldn't be a proper presentation if I didn't have some PowerPoints, would it? Hang on a sec. There you go. All right. Let's put this in. All right. Gosh, I've got ahead of myself. I've already asked you this question. Megan, I haven't asked you this question. Have you sat SBL before? Megan? Hello?
Hello. Sorry,
Hi.
I think I was on mute. No, I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. So we've got a split here. Half of you have and half of you haven't. All right. So that's the 50-50. I want to start with this, the most common reasons for exam failure. Now, I've said, one of them is, of course, a misunderstanding of what the examiner requires. But if we kind of go down into the biggest mistakes that students make, and you look at examiners' reports, these are the 4 that come up time after time after time. Okay, and if we have time, I'll share an example of an examiner's report where this comes out very clearly. Number 1, time discipline. Okay, time discipline. And how does the examiner know that you had problems with time discipline in the exam? Well, it's very obvious, because student candidates that have had those problems will do reasonably well in, I don't know, let's say the first 3 questions, and then write completely nothing in the 4th question, for example, right? And so you'll often see, examiners saying that it was clear candidates ran out of time, or what they'll find is that there are some answers which are excessively long, which must have taken much more time than is available for that particular question, right? So time discipline is a big issue, and we'll come back to that in a second. Bad exam technique. Now look, SBL is a big exam. It's a big exam. I mean, Ramissa was saying that she was overwhelmed with the volume of data that you have to absorb and deal with in the examination. Francis, did you feel the same?
Yes. I
Yeah.
felt the same.
Yeah.
Actually, by the end of the paper, I found it very difficult to concentrate and give out the right kind of points.
Yeah.
So
No, it's tiring, 4 hours.
yeah, I actually got worn out, to be honest,
Yeah.
by the end of the exam.
Students laugh when I say this to them, but I say, have a good breakfast, before you go, because you'll use all of that energy in your thinking, right? So it's an exhausting exam. It's long, and there's a huge amount of data and information to absorb, right? So you need a technique. You can't just go in there and start writing answers. You need a technique, and I'll talk to you about what that is in just a second. The third thing that comes up regularly in examiners' reports is RTQ and ATQ. RTQ and ATQ simply means to read the question and then, guess what? Answer the question. All right. Now that might seem obvious. Well, of course, that's what you do in the exam. The problem with SBL candidates is that they read the question and then they answer a different, right? They answer the question they wish had been there, rather than the question that was actually asked. Now, I'll give you a small example of this, if I can just pull that up. No, it's somehow vanished. Oh, there we go. There we go. This is an examiner's report. All right, and here you see what he has said, and here the second point, not answering the question that had been asked. And what happens is that students read a question and they think, okay, I know what this is about. This is about, I don't know, they read one word, they read the word competition, right? And they say, I know what this is about. This is about competitive strategies. Well, I know what this is about. This is about competitive threat. And they write everything they know about those 2 things, and off they go. Okay, off they go. And they find that they spend ages, they think that they've produced a brilliant answer, and actually they've earned 0 marks. Okay, so it's very common to answer the wrong question. Now, sometimes students do that because they think, well, you know what, I'm not sure what to write on this, but I know something similar, so I'm going to write on that instead, thinking that the marker won't notice and that you will be getting you will get some marks at least. The answer is no, you won't. The marker will notice and you'll get 0 marks. It's as simple as that. The ability to understand what you've been asked to do and to respond in a relevant and focused way is a critical skill that professionals are expected to have. At the end of the day, you'll be working with other people who'll be relying on your expertise, and your ability to communicate is key. It's key. They're relying on that. And so that's one of the things that's being tested in SBL. And the other main area for failure, or reason for failure, is a lack of technical knowledge. Now, with SBL, please remember that there is a lot of assumed knowledge. So the syllabus doesn't go through, for example, a reminder of what sensitivity analysis is, or how it's worked out, or NPV, or internal rate of return, or what a matrix structure means. It doesn't do that. Why? Because it's assumed knowledge. Now, if you've been exempted your earlier papers, it means that you have covered these in your earlier studies, all right? And you've forgotten. And so you think, oh my God, what's a matrix structure? Okay. And so students kind of think, well, I'll just kind of bluff my way through this. And it doesn't work either, because the examiner uses terms like matrix, or, cultural web, or whatever it is, and expect you to understand what they are and to be able to apply them in a situation like this. Okay. So that's why a lot of students don't succeed. Are there any questions on this? Ramissa, I know you when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that it was this kind of, because you hadn't studied in ages, you'd kind of forgotten many of these topics. Trust me, you're not alone. All right. Many students are in this position. So how do we deal with that? I'll come back to in a second. Right. Who am I? Gosh. Some of you may have heard of me. I'm an FCCA and an MBA in international business. I've been teaching for over 25 years, and I've been teaching a lot of subjects. The time when I taught 9 subjects. Now I focus only on SBL, but that was an extremely good preparation for SBL, because, as you know, SBL requires an understanding of a number of different subjects, including, for example, financial management, business, accountant in business, all right, even a bit of law, actually. So having taught all of those makes it easier for me to communicate, what we need to know as students, to understand those principles when we use them in SBL. I do a lot of work for the ACCA. They call me a tutor guru, which is somewhat embarrassing, but there you are. That's what they call me. So if you go onto the ACCA resources, you'll see quite a few webinars that I've conducted on there. But my background isn't only teaching. I've also run 2 multinational businesses, one in Central Eastern Europe and one in Middle East and North Africa. Right. So again, that I've got the hands-on knowledge of doing that, and that's useful for SBL because, as I've already said, it's a very practical examination, and so having experienced the practical elements of running a business, that helps a lot as well. Okay, so let's start with those challenges that most students have. And by the way, jump in if you have any questions at any time. Just interrupt. I don't mind at all. It's a very small group, and so we can handle the questions as we go along. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Time discipline. Now, as I said earlier, we need a structure for approaching the examination, and we'll be talking about that in a later slide where I talk about what is the right approach. But one of the parts of that, a key part of that structure, is how much time do I spend on my RPRT? RPRT, anyone know what that stands for? RPRT stands for reading, planning, and reflection time. It is an ACCA expression used to describe what you do when you first get in the start the SBL examination. You need that because there's so much information in there that you need to read and plan and reflect on. And you know, a lot of places recommend spending 45 minutes on the RPRT. I recommend 60, a maximum of 60. You cannot do what you need to do in 45 minutes at the beginning of the exam. And this is what you do before you start answering. Before you start answering the question, okay? So that's something students get confused on. They spend too much time on RPRT and don't leave themselves enough time for answering the question. How long do I spend on each question, you know, and how much do I write, and how long should each point be? Typical question. Now, the answer to this one, how long do I spend on each question, is very simple. If you have 100 marks to earn in 3 hours, you have 1.8 minutes to earn each mark, correct? 1.8 minutes to earn each mark. So if a question carries 10 marks in total, how long do you have in which to answer that question? 1.8 multiplied by 10, which is 18 minutes. That's it. That's it. Okay. Now with SBL, it's not just, you know, you have to add on to that strategic professional skills mark. So if you've got 8 technical marks and 2 professional skills marks, you would spend 18 minutes, because that's 10 marks in total. You'd spend 18 minutes in total, all right, on answering that question. Now, students kind of get that. That's fine. It makes sense. Yes, it's sensible. It won't be the first time you've heard it. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Students see a question they like, they start to answer it, they get really excited because they know everything about this question. And they want to really impress the marker with the extent of their knowledge. And they realize their time has run out, but they haven't quite finished. There's another paragraph, there's one more paragraph which they want to put in. So they continue and they say, well, you know, the next question I know nothing about, so I'm not going to write much there anyway. So forget about it. I'll just use some of that time here, right? So what happened? What's the problem with that? The first problem is that let's suppose you overrun by 5 minutes on that answer, okay? The majority of marks in any answer are earned in the first 75% of the answer. Majority of marks earned in the first 3/4 of the answer. So that means those 5 minutes earn you very few, maybe 1 mark or 2 marks, if any, because it's right at the end of the answer. Most of your marks were earned earlier. So in those 5 minutes, you earned hardly anything. If you had spent those 5 minutes in the beginning of the next question, or answering the next question, you would have earned 3 or 4 marks. Right? So what happens is students overrun because they're excited and they want to show off their knowledge and don't leave enough time for the next question, which is actually a very time mark inefficient way of doing this. What do I mean by mark efficiency and inefficiency? Well, mark efficiency means maximizing the number of marks you earn in each minute that you spend in the examination. That's what you want to do. And by overrunning on time, you're not doing that. Okay? So you spend 18 minutes on a 10-mark question. And if you haven't finished your answer when time runs out, there's only one thing you should hear in your mind, and that is move on. Move on. It doesn't matter whether you're writing the best answer, right, ever in the world. You just move on. You know, your aim is not to impress the marker. You have one aim, 50%. That's it. Okay? And overrunning on time gets in the way of achieving that. Another common mistake that students make is they waste time on irrelevant points. So they'll write everything they know about a particular topic, right, just to show the marker how brilliant they are in this topic because they revised it last night. But you see, very often, most of those points are irrelevant to the question. You know, and the marker isn't impressed, and the marker is not going to give you any marks for it anyway. As I keep saying, SBL is not an academic or theoretical subject. It's not about showing off your knowledge. It's about application of your knowledge and your skills and your judgment to a real world situation. So you use only those parts that are relevant to that situation, nothing more. You put anything else in there, it's a waste of time because you earn 0 marks. But students think, well, it makes my answer longer. It shows off my knowledge on this particular topic. I don't know, in investment appraisal, whatever it may be. All right, and so yeah, I'll get some more marks. No, you won't. So don't do it. You need to be really, really focused every minute that you're in this examination on earning your 50 marks or more. That's it. You don't care whether the marker likes, is impressed by you. You don't care whether the marker thinks you're a genius. It doesn't matter. You want your 50%. All right, that's it. I mean, the marker's not going to care anyway. He's going to mark 200 scripts, 300 scripts at a sitting. He doesn't remember what everyone says. He'll just give you marks for what you've done, and he'll move on. So don't waste your time trying to impress him. What's the right exam technique? Well, these are the steps that you really are key to getting your technique right. Number one, analyze Exhibit 1 to understand the context. Exhibit 1 in the SBL examination is always the overview. All right, it's always the overview, which gives you the context of the company, the organization, and you need to understand that before you start. Number two, you copy paste all of your tasks into your WP response option. Sometimes you'll need to reformat that in the response option because it simply doesn't copy across very easily. Number three, you analyze the task, and I'll explain what that means in a second. Number four, you analyze your exhibits. And number five, you're now ready to start the exam. Now, those first 4 steps all happen in the RPRT, in the 60 minutes of your first 60 minutes of your examination. Okay, what happens when you analyze all your tasks? What do I mean by that? I mean that for each task, you highlight keywords, right? What are the verbs, if you like? What do you need to do? Do you need to describe? Do you need to recommend? Do you need to critically evaluate? Do you need to explain the benefit to the board, right? So you would highlight the word benefit, explain, or critically evaluate. You'd highlight the word board of directors or CEO because that's usually who you are writing for in the exam. Why would you highlight those, do you think? Board of directors or CEO? Why? Why is that important to highlight in the tasks in the examination?
So that you know your audience.
Good. And why is that important in SBL?
I think it's important because you need to know the tone in which you need to take.
Excellent. Tone and content. Good. Yes, absolutely right. Okay, tone and content. So if you're presenting a report to the board, you'll have a completely different tone to if you're writing an email to the CEO, for example, or the chairman. If you're writing a report, presenting a report to the board, you have completely different content. You will have content which is relevant to the board, which means strategic, right? It's strategic information. They don't want to know what Porter said about competition. They want to know how they're going to handle the problem that's in front of them in a strategic context. In other words, in the context of the strategy that the company currently has or is considering. So you talk strategic language to the board, right? If you're doing an email to the CEO or the chairman, it's much more conversational, right? And it's very focused on what you've specifically been asked to do, right? So you'll go into a bit more detail. So that's why you highlight the key, who your audience is when you're analyzing your tasks, all right? Also, the third thing you analyze in your tasks is if you've got 2 parts to the task, and very often that happens, all right? The question will be, we'll say something like, I don't know, identify the key risks that the company is facing in this market and make some recommendations or what they can do to mitigate those risks, something like that, maybe. Now, there are 2 parts. identify risks, make recommendations on mitigation, right? 2 parts. Unfortunately, what happens very often is that students answer the first part and then they forget, because they're stressed, they forget there's a second part as well, right? And so they think they've done a brilliant answer, but they've only earned half the mark. And they move on. That's why you highlight the and, if you like, the connecting word, so that when you keep looking back to your task, you are reminded, look, there are 2 parts to this, and there are ways that when I work with my students, the ways of making sure that we don't miss out on the part of the question. Then, and by the way, that analysis of tasks should take no longer than 20 minutes, which means that you now have 40 minutes to analyze your exhibits. Now, another common mistake that students make when they analyze the exhibits is they kind of scan through them, say, yep, I know them. Impossible, guaranteed. Impossible, you don't know them, right? Because they're so excited about starting to write their answers. And they said, never mind, I'll come back to the exhibit if I need them. But I know what's in there. Big mistake, all right? There's a lot of information in the exhibit, and much of it, and much of it is interconnected, right? So when you're writing an answer, you will probably have to draw information from more than one exhibit. So you really need to be kind of reasonably solid about what's in each one. And for that, you need time, right? So you take 40 minutes on doing that. That takes you to the end of your first hour. You're now ready to start your answer, right? So here we go. We start on task number 1. And by the way, you will always answer your tasks in numerical order, in sequence. You can't jump around. All the tasks are compulsory, as you probably already know. Now, one of the things, another common mistake that students make is they'll say, well, it's a really high level of competition in the market. And, we're probably going to need some kind of competitive advantage. And the student's happy with himself, right? Says, yeah, great, I've made the point, I've identified there's a threat and we're going to have to do something about it. End of story. Not in SBL, it's not. In SBL, whenever student makes a point, I always ask them to ask themselves the so what question. All right. So what do I mean by the so what question? I mean that, okay, yes, it's highly competitive. We need to find a competitive strategy. Now, so what? The board is listening. What's your recommendation? Right? And your recommendation in SBL might be, because we serve a niche client, I would recommend pursuing a focused strategy to maintain and gain competitive advantage by identifying the needs of our niche client better than anyone else and satisfying them better than anyone else, and as a result, being able to charge a premium price. So although we have a smaller market share, we are profitable. That's the so what. That's what the board of directors wants to know, right? They know they have competition. They know that. They know they have to do something about it. You're not there to tell them what they already know. You're there to add value by answering the so what question. And lots of students forget about the last bit because they think it's a university exam. It's not. And another structure that I strongly recommend to my students is the state, explain, apply structure. It's very similar to the so what thing, but it's slightly different. So state means state your point. So for example, you might say, using the same example, we work in a highly competitive environment. Explain your point. This means that we need to gain some kind of competitive advantage. If we're not going to lose market share and profitability, market price is going to go down, etc., etc. All right, so we need to do something. Apply then means, okay, so what we are now going to do in company X, and remember, all our answers have to be related to company X, whatever organization is, right? So company X needs to do A, B, C, D, all right? It can't be a generic answer. So apply it to the organization, apply it to the circumstance. Okay? That is the right exam technique. Now, there's a lot there, and I've just scratched the surface with you right now. You know, this I do with my students on my online revision course. It at least 4 weeks, preferably 6 weeks. So that's why now a lot of students come in signing up the revision program so that they get lots of time to practice this. Are there any questions, by the way, before I move on? Read the question, answer the question. Another major reason for failing, highlighting is crucial. We've already touched on that. Second one, think about what the examiner is asking. Yes, many students, what they do is they see a word they recognize and they think they know what the examiner is asking. Let me give you an example. There was a question which said something like, what is the value of customer segmentation to Optima, right? What is the value of customer segmentation to Optima? Now, most students thought that meant, what is customer segmentation? What is customer segmentation? Wrong. You're not expected to explain customer segmentation. You're expected to know what customer segmentation is, what it means. The question was not asking you that. The question was asking you, how can Optima use it to add value to its service, to grow? That was what the question was asking for. And most students spent all of their time just answering the, describing what customer segmentation was and giving examples of customer segmentation. And again, they did it all in a theoretical sense. In other words, not once did many students apply that to the company in question. Complete waste of time, 0 marks. Right? So think about what the examiner is asking before you just leap into answering the question. Now, and sometimes the wording of the question is a little bit murky, right? Not so clear, not so easy to understand. So it does take a few seconds to think about it. Take your time. It's time well spent, because it's better to run out of time writing a correct answer than writing an answer which is completely incorrect and earn 0 in the time that you have available. And then answer the question, nothing else. I have touched on this earlier, and when I said, students think that quantity is more important than quality, it's not. All right, you could probably earn as many marks, if not more, from an answer that was, I don't know, 3 paragraphs long, half a page long, for example. All right, but was relevant, than an answer which is 2 pages long, 90% of which is irrelevant. All you've done is waste time and earn 0 marks. You haven't maximized your mark efficiency. RTQ, ATQ, any questions? By the way, those of you who have sat SBL before, did you experience that? Did you have a problem understanding what the examiner was asking for? Remiso? Francis?
No, I think the questions, they were kind of straightforward for me, so I didn't have any issue on understanding.
Good. All right. Excellent. Francis, I guess you didn't have any problems either then, because you're being very quiet.
No, yeah. I didn't have any problem. The
Good.
questions were straightforward.
All right. Okay. Which paper did you do, Francis?
I did my exam in June.
Yeah, I can't remember which one that was. I do so many past papers. Do you remember which organization was in that one?
I don't remember the organization, but then
What was
it
the
was
industry?
related to some television show. I mean, it was like a government-owned television channel.
Oh,
something like
okay.
that.
No, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that paper. It hasn't been released by the ACCA.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. All right, moving on. Lack of technical knowledge, assumed knowledge we've already spoken about. Now, how do we fill the gaps in our assumed knowledge? You have a number of things you can do. The first is you know, if you've kept some of your old notes, all right, from your earlier studies, of course, you can always refer back to those. The second is that you can basically go and do some online research and identify books that cover those topics. But you know, I wouldn't recommend that. It gets very expensive because you don't need in-depth knowledge, but you do need to know how these things are used in the real world. Okay, for example, investment appraisal. The third thing that you can do is actually if you buy, for example, the BPP workbook on SBL, they have a really good section in it at the end where they cover all the assumed knowledge. All right, so the material is there for you to revise from, and that is what I would recommend. In fact, that's why I use BPP material on my program. I think they're really good. All right, so I'm not sure if the Kaplan workbook does the same thing. Does anyone here use Kaplan, or have you used Kaplan?
I'm with Kaplan.
Okay, and how do you find the workbook, Megan?
Well, to be fair, we get two. So we get a workbook which isn't
Like the
in great
textbook.
detail, and then there's the study text. So
Right. Okay.
the study text is like great detail, which is helpful if you don't quite understand it, because then you can understand it more. But then to be fair, the workbook that they produce is actually quite handy just for like having little notes.
Right. And do they have a revision of assumed knowledge topics in there?
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of it is assumed knowledge. So in terms of like the actual teaching of it, it's very brief, if you like.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I would say like going through it, like when I was initially started studying, I was a bit like, oh, this was in this was in that.
Right.
And, like it did sort of ring bells.
Good. Good. Okay. Good. So BPP and Kaplan are the two big ones, of course, in training publishing. So if I mean, they both have assumed knowledge in there, so simply access those, right? And the other thing about lack of technical knowledge, it's kind of indirectly associated with it, is that with SBL, there are a number of technical areas which you may well touch on in your answer to one question. So, for example, you might have a question on corporate governance, all right? And it might, depending on the wording of the question and the context, it might be relevant for you then to also bring in a conversation on risk and risk management. So how would that work? Well, let's suppose the question was, we're talking about a company that's in a high risk industry, mining, for example. Okay, and you're told what the corporate governance structure is. You see that there isn't an internal audit function. Okay, and you see there's no risk committee. You also see that there is no one on the board that has responsibility, and I'm talking predominantly about non-executives here, who has responsibility for risk management. So here you would say, well, look, you were in a high-risk industry. At the end of the day, the board of directors is responsible for risk management, and therefore it is in their best interest to manage the risk by having representation at the board. This would take the form of a separate risk committee. Some organizations have a risk committee embedded in the audit committee, but because this is a high risk industry, we'd have a separate risk committee which would be made up of, people with this background, blah, blah, blah. This is what they would do. All right. So here is a very simple, straightforward, very common example of a question which integrates two areas. You might even get a question where your answer could integrate three areas, okay, or more. And this is another kind of misunderstanding that students have. They think if a question on corporate governance is only on corporate governance. Not true, because in the real world, challenges don't come to us in neat little boxes, all wrapped up. Okay, they are open and they're affected by, and they affect all kinds of other areas in the environment. And so we need to recognize those interactions in our exam answers as well. Is that clear? Okay, and reflect it in the way that we answer the question. Okay, so any questions? I know I've been asking you throughout, but here's your chance. What do you think? What do you think? What have you picked up from our short time together? What struck you most? Well, I hope something struck you. I'd be terribly disappointed if nothing struck you. Nothing, you didn't there wasn't an aha moment somewhere, or something that surprised you, perhaps.
Okay. Is
yeah.
The integration of topics.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been trying to figure out and how to how to actually implement.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to do, because essentially what it requires is an ability to kind of hover over the whole of the syllabus and say, right, that topic over there is relevant, and this topic over there is relevant, and this one here, and then bring them all together into one answer. And that's not something that's easily done unless and until you are fully familiar with the whole of the syllabus, and you recognize that you need to integrate other topics into your answer. It's a way of thinking that you need, as well as the technical knowledge. SBL really is very much about technique, about approach, about about the way you kind of craft your answer. All of those need a lot of thought, a lot more than typical sort of single subject, if you see what I mean. So financial management is all about financial management, right? SBL is about everything. It's about financial management and strategy and lots of other things too. So yeah, so that is one of the biggest challenges of SBL, and again, it's something that requires enormous practice and investment in time. I've lost count of the number of times that students said to me, "Well, SBL is just a bit of blah blah." Isn't it? You read the workbook, you just learn a few models, and you just regurgitate it in the examination. That's it, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's not. Unfortunately for them, it's not. There is quite a complex approach that you need to take to pass SBL. Any other thoughts? Anything else that you'd like to share on what we've covered? Whoever, you've unmuted. I thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just one more. You spoke about in the beginning one of your students that got about 89 or something.
Yeah.
And you said they basically did not use any technical knowledge in that.
No, he didn't use any models.
Oh, any models. Okay.
Yeah. So you need technical knowledge.
Oh, you didn't use any models.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I hear that.
By the way, the other thing with models is that, again, students think that you have to name the model and explain it. You don't. All right, you don't. Can you imagine standing in front of the board of directors and saying, by the way, a really handy model to use here is the cultural web, and this is what it says. And you go through the cultural web to the board of directors. What do you think they'll say? Will they be desperately impressed by you? Answer no. They'll ask you why you're wasting their time. They don't care about the cultural web. They don't care about models. They care about strategic solutions. End of story. And a lot of students waste a lot of time talking about models and explaining them. Don't do that. Not a theoretical academic subject. Not. Okay. So because you guys have made the effort to join us today, and I hope you found that useful, I'm going to make you a special offer. I have an online training program, and currently I'm taking students on for my revision course, so you can sign on now. And there we go through a whole host of past exam papers. You have recorded analyses done by me. You'll see my answers to those exam papers, and I'll talk you through those in a video. In addition, you'll have access to other students who are sitting in December in a group WhatsApp, okay, or WhatsApp group, whichever you like. All right, and you have access to me 24/7 to ask any questions that you may have while you're going through the videos and while you are attempting, because going through the videos on my course does not mean going through the videos. It means starting the video, pausing, doing some work, restarting the video, pausing, doing some work. That's what it means. And then you have access to me if you have any questions. You have access to your group if you have questions, and you have 2 mock exams, which you have the opportunity to sit under exam conditions, under exam timing. You send me those mock exams, and I send them to a professional marker, so you get the standard of marking that you would in the real exam. You get an enormous amount of feedback. This guy loves giving feedback. Honestly, he spends ages on the feedback. There's a separate page or 2 for each script that he provides feedback of. Okay, and then with my students, I go through their individual performance and improvements that are necessary, and then we do the second mock exam on the revision course, and by that time they're ready. Yeah, and we usually get that done the weekend before the exam. So that's what how it works, and it does produce results. Almost every sitting I get someone in their 70s or 80s, and pass rates way above the international pass rates. So it's a system which works, and what I've shared with you today is a small part of it. All right. Now, if you decide to sign on today, then I will give you a 10% discount off the normal fee. All right, off the normal fee. And what you need to do is you need to reach out to me. Actually, hang on a sec. Let me just adjust this because I forgot to put my phone number on here so we can connect. Oh, bloody hell. So that we can connect on WhatsApp. All right. Okay. So fmelearnonline.com is where you can have a look at my course. Yeah, I've got lots of things on YouTube. Of course, you've got the ACCA's student resources where I'm represented. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. Okay, so connect with me on there. And that's my telephone number, so you can reach out to me and we can connect on WhatsApp. Okay, that's the one I usually use. All right, and so we can talk there. So I say if you decide to sign up on my revision course at FME Learn Online, I'll give you a 10% discount off the fee. Any questions? Well, you need to do it in 24 hours, yeah? 24 hours. So the way to do that is get in touch with me, all right? Send me an email. Oh, blimey, I forgot my email. I don't know what's happening to me today. Losing my marbles. Try again. There you go. Ashim at aka-lead.com, or as I say, connect with me on WhatsApp. I look at LinkedIn and Facebook, of course, but not as often as I look at WhatsApp. So that's probably the fastest way to connect. All right, so if you've got all this down, I'm going to take this off. Stop sharing. Has everyone got this down? If you want it, of course. Okay. All right. So, guys, anything you'd like to share? Anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye for tonight, at least? Any thoughts? I think you're tired. You've had a long day at the office. You don't have energy to ask questions. That's my feeling. Am I right? Possibly. All right. Excellent. Well, in that case, thank you very much for making the effort and taking the time. I hope that you got value from our hour together. If you have any questions that you want to ask me, you know what to do. You have all my contact details. All right. Meantime, I'll let you get off and enjoy the rest of the evening. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Pleasure. Thanks. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
You're very welcome. Goodbye.